Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Building Markets, Energy Storage in Massachusetts, and Offshore Wind in Rhode Island. Before we get started and pass the webinar over to our guest speakers that we have on the line, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. All of our attendees are in listen-only mode, so hopefully you can hear us, but we can't hear you. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of today's webinar. You can call in using a telephone, or you can connect using a computer mic and speakers. If you'd like to minimize the webinar console so that you can view the presentation full screen, you can do that by clicking on the orange arrow that you see circled here. A very important note, we ask that you please submit your questions and your comments throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on the webinar console and hitting send. We'll be reading through your questions throughout the webinar. And today we're doing something a little bit different. We have two distinct presentations. The first is on offshore wind in Rhode Island. We'll be having that presentation first and then a Q&A on that presentation directly afterward. And then after that, a presentation on the Massachusetts ACES Energy Storage Program. And then the Q&A for that presentation will be directly after that. So again, do type your questions in when you think of them. Don't wait until the end to type in your question. We should have a lot of questions today. There's a lot of people registered for this webinar. So to make sure that we get to your question, type it in. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you an email with a copy of the recording and a link to the PDF of the slides, probably this afternoon, at least within about 48 hours. And we'll also be posting all of those webinar materials on our website at cesa.org/webinars. So, getting started with today's webinar. Today's webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA. CESA is a coalition of public energy agencies, mostly state agencies from around the country, working together to advance clean energy. And you can see some of our members here. And today's webinar is being presented by CESA as part of our State Leadership in Clean Energy Awards program. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'm going to pass it over to one of our moderators for today's webinar, Val Story. Val is a project director here at CESA.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Yes, as Sam said, I will be moderating the offshore wind portion of this webinar. We wanted to let you know a little bit about the State Leadership in Clean Energy Awards, otherwise known as SLICE. SLICE is a biennial award that recognizes and celebrates states' leadership in innovation, as well as in accelerating and supporting renewable energy technologies. We've been giving out SLICE awards since 2008, and this year we awarded 6 winners from across the country with SLICE awards. The way this works is CESA members submit applications or nominations, and those are then reviewed by a panel of independent judges. And this year we had 5 distinguished judges reviewing the applications, including representatives from NREL, the Council of State Governments, a former director of the Alaska Energy Authority, and a former commissioner from the California Clean Energy Commission. And then the judges score the nominees based on several criteria, which includes replicability, innovation, and cost effectiveness. And you can read more about SLICE, its history, the awards we've presented in the past on our website. And you can also look at a report which case studies this year's 6 winners at the web address that Sam has put up on your screen. The 6 winning programs this year, I believe, are on the next slide, Sam. Oh, maybe I missed them. Were they 2 slides ago? There they are. So we awarded 6 winners. They're up on the screen now, and we've held so far 2 webinars. On 4 of them, we held a webinar on the New York and Oregon programs supporting community renewable energy programs, and then the second webinar was on Connecticut and Minnesota programs that were expanding solar markets. Those recordings, like this one, are available on our website. So moving to today's webinar, It's a two-part webinar. I will be moderating the first portion. The first portion is going to discuss the Block Island Wind Farm. It's the nation's first offshore wind farm, and Chris Cairns from the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources will be talking about this 30-megawatt project, about which the Slice judges said, the Block Island Wind Farm is a monumental achievement and a milestone for renewable energy in the U.S. Let me introduce Chris, and then Sam will pass controls over for Chris to present. So Chris Cairns is the Legislative Liaison and Interdepartmental Manager for the Office of Energy Resources in Rhode Island, and he works on a variety of state energy legislation, which includes energy efficiency and renewable energy. Before working for the Office of Energy Resources, he was Governor Lincoln Chafee's policy and legislative analyst for transportation, environmental, and energy matters. He graduated from URI with a bachelor's degree in environmental and economic management in 2008. Thanks for being with us, Chris.
Thank you for having me. I will give a quick high-level overview of the Block Island project and just briefly what's ahead in terms of the 400 megawatt project that we're hoping to see happen over the next couple of years. As I suspect a number of you are on the call today for the cool energy storage efforts away in Massachusetts right now. As it relates to Rhode Island's Block Island Wind Farm project, conversations and the idea of offshore wind in Rhode Island began in January of 2007. And really the first steps were to do the academic fishery, fishing vessel lane traffic research known as the Ocean SAMP, the Special Area Management Plan, in terms of mapping out the potential locations for offshore wind, both in state waters and federal waters. That process was administered by our Coastal Resource Management Council in coordination with the University of Rhode Island and the Bay campus involved in coastal and ocean-related matters. That process took place between 2008 and 2012, where it concluded with putting out recommended locations for both the state project, which is the 30 megawatt offshore wind farm, and also the potential location within federal waters known as the Rhode Island, Massachusetts area of mutual interest location for the project that was recently announced by Governor Raimondo back in June. So that process concluded in late 2012. The Ocean SAMP process was recognized as a model for potential other states to utilize in terms of mapping out potential locations for offshore wind development in the Northeast. In the Block Island project, once the Ocean SAMP process and the power purchase agreement process was wrapped up in 2011, 2012, the next steps were the permitting stages between the state and federal governments with Deepwater Wind, our Coastal Resource Management Council, our Department of Environmental Management, and the other applicable matters that need to be agreed to, including not starting construction or shutting down construction during any notification of right whales coming through the area during the construction seasons. So ultimately, the Block Island project, the first phase was the installation of the jacket systems, which took place in the summer of 2015, followed by the installation of the turbines, which took place in the summer of 2016. During that time period, there was also the engineering geotech work as it relates to the cable line that would ultimately connect the turbines to both Block Island, but also into the mainland down at the Narragansett State Beach that was owned by the state. The turbines and the nacelles blades were all installed rather smoothly. In the summer of 2016, we lucked out in that the weather conditions were actually extremely well during that phase. We actually had more of a difficult time due to weather conditions in the summer of 2015 as it relates to the jacket system installation. Ultimately, the Block Island wind farm was interconnected by National Grid and went commercially live in November of 2016. So the system has now been operational for almost 2 years. There have been no reported issues since it went live. We're getting some really good data in terms of its operation, particularly during the winter months with peak demand in terms of the congested issues with natural gas in the region. Offshore wind is proving to be very valuable during the winter months to deal with that congestion in terms of diversification of our energy resources. And most recently, Governor Raimondo announced the selection of deepwater wind through a collaborative partnership that we did with the state of Massachusetts through their offshore wind RFP process. We made the announcement that we'll be pursuing a 400 megawatt project with deepwater wind. The project is located within the Rhode Island, Massachusetts area of mutual interest known as the AMI, and it's located in the waters that were reviewed through the ocean SAMP process. Deepwater Wind won that lease area in the summer of 2013. That was the first offshore wind auction performed by the federal government. Process involving that will be Deepwater Wind and National Grid are currently negotiating the terms and conditions of the power purchase agreement, which will likely be filed to our Public Utilities Commission sometime either before or after the Labor Day holiday break. And then that will go through a formal docket review, public testimony, public hearings to review the project proposal by the Public Utility Commission, with a decision being issued about that project by the PUC, likely either before the end of this year or sometime in Q1 2019. The schedule for that project, I believe, is if the PPA is approved, then the proceeding after that would be the environmental review process, identifying the spatial arrangement of the turbines, followed by construction, I believe, in 2022, 2023 timeframe. So it's still has a ways to go, but as we saw with the Block Island wind farm and lessons learned, that project started as a concept in 2007 and became commercially operational at the end of 2016. So just under 10 years. I don't think we're expecting that to be the lead time for the federal project, but we're likely looking at a 3 to 5 year endeavor between the PPA and that project becoming commercially operational. And I think that's it for I got a high level summary, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Great, thanks, Chris. Feel free to type in questions and I will pass them along to Chris before we move on to our energy storage presentation. So kudos to Rhode Island for kickstarting the industry in the US. We've got some questions to begin with. So the SLICE Awards, as I mentioned, are in part judged on project replicability. And Chris, you mentioned that the ocean SAMP process is not only unique, but is replicable. And I understand that other states are looking to Rhode Island and to your SAMP process. Could you talk more about what is unique about the process and what other states are looking to or have replicated?
Yeah, I believe it was the first endeavor in terms of when we started the process in late 2007 into 2008. We made the determination that if we were going to be successful, we needed to have a very broad set of different stakeholders at the table between our state fishery agencies, recreational users of those waters, commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, commercial activities that go through the Narragansett Bay but past the Block Island water area in terms of going up into Massachusetts, but also working with our federal agencies, including BOEM, the Department of Interior, also the U.S. Navy. The Navy has a very large naval operations in Newport, and certain waters are used by the Navy for both public and confidential activities, so we needed to make sure that we properly fleshed that out. So it was the first of its kind in the U.S. To really embark on a really broad and in-depth analysis and gathering public comment and feedback about those locations. And again, it was a lengthy process that stretched over a number of years. And then even when we did the federal waters location, it required a lot of collaboration and constructive dialogue amongst the parties. And that before we had the first offshore wind auction in 2013, we removed the Cox's Ledge, which was a significant fishery ground for a number of fishermen, both in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, to alleviate their concerns.
Thank you. And speaking of timelines, you mentioned that Rhode Island started down the offshore wind path back in 2007 or 8, and I believe the turbine started spinning, was it November of 2016 or so? So a long lead time. Looking ahead, do you see ways to streamline any part of the process?
I think, there needs to be, when we talk with stakeholders, there needs to be a reasonable expectation. I think saying that you're going to start construction and build an offshore wind farm within a span of probably 3 years is not realistic, in that there's a lot of environmental analysis and studies that have to go into. You also have to be mindful that we have a pretty thriving fishing industry both in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, but also fishermen from other states that use our waters and have been using those waters for generations. So we need to make sure that we do our due diligence and that there are going to be impacts to fishery activities, no question about it, with offshore wind development advancing in the Northeast and Rhode Island. But you have to do your due diligence and make sure that you're doing it in a collaborative effort where people feel as though they have a say in the process. And I think that's extremely critical for Rhode Island as we embark on this next project, is to make sure that we try to do it in an equitable fashion. So we have a thriving new sector of our state's economy in terms of offshore wind, but not losing sight of the fact that there's a strong economic sector as it relates to fishery activities that we can't lose touch of.
Thanks, Chris. Let's talk about pricing. So I believe a week or two ago, the pricing for coming out of the Vineyard Wind project was announced. And looking at the Block Island Wind Farm, the PPA agreement with Deepwater Wind, I think maybe is nearly double that. Can you talk more about the project pricing? Is it economies of scale? Was there something unique about the Block Island Wind Farm that affected the pricing? And then looking ahead, do you anticipate the next project, the Revolution Wind project, will be less?
I would say, in terms of, I can't discuss yet the pricing as it relates to the Rhode Island project. That will eventually become public information once the information goes through the Public Utilities Commission review process, again, sometime in the fall. And all I can say is that the price will be dramatically different than the prices that were negotiated and proposed for the Block Island farm back in 2009, 2010.
Thank you. If there are any other questions, feel free to add those in now. Otherwise, Sam, I think we can move on to the second presentation.
Okay, thanks, Val. Todd, passing it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Val, and thanks to everyone who showed up to the webinar, and thanks to Chris Cairns from Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources. We're going to go ahead and transition now to the second topic for this dual webinar, which is the ACES Energy Storage Grant Program in Massachusetts, which also won a SLICE award. And I'd like to just start by introducing our two speakers from Massachusetts, and then we'll pass the baton to them and they can tell you all about the program. We have with us Galen Nelson and Kavita Ravi, both from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Galen is Senior Director of Innovation and Industry Support. He leads a team focused on providing targeted, strategic, and timely resources to help clean energy companies and entrepreneurs develop technologies while moving closer to commercialization and market traction in established and emerging markets. And his focus is primarily on microgrids, energy storage, and energy resilience. Kavita is the Director of Emerging Markets at Mass CEC. She's responsible for promoting emerging markets such as the energy storage, clean transportation, and grid modernization markets in the state. She co-led the State of Charge report in 2016, which was the foundational report that explored market opportunities and barriers for energy storage in Massachusetts. And she, in 2017, began leading programs to demonstrate viable business models for energy storage in the marketplace. That leads us right into the ACES grant program. I'd like to make a couple of observations about the ACES program before I turn the microphone over to our speakers. First of all, the ACES grant program should be seen, I think, as part of a larger suite of programs and policy around energy storage in the state. As I mentioned, there was the State of Charge report. That report recommended a number of different policies and programs related to promoting energy storage deployment. And I think Kavita and Nelson will delve into that a bit in their presentation. But I just wanted to say that Massachusetts has really leaped out as a leader in terms of putting forth a comprehensive suite of regulatory reform, programmatic advances, and policy changes around energy storage. The other thing I wanted to point out was that we see lots of grant programs and have for many years in states all over the nation to support new technologies. ACES is not just another grant program. It's a very innovative program. I won't go into details because, again, our speakers will be covering that, but just to say that it really focuses on exploring areas that haven't been previously explored in terms of opportunities for energy storage, business models, and innovative economic models for storage. So thank you all again for coming, and I will now turn this over to Kavita and Galen from Mass CEC.
Great, thank you, Todd. We're really happy to join you and everyone else on the phone. I want to thank CESA for your leadership and for the Slice Award itself, which of course highlights the good work that so many states across the country are doing in this space. Again, my name is Galen Nelson. I'm a Senior Director here at the Mass Clean Energy Center. We're the state's Clean Energy Economic Development Authority. We're certainly going to focus on the ACES program, as Todd mentioned, but Todd also asked us to spend just a couple minutes on the broader storage context here in Massachusetts, so we will do that. I also want to acknowledge all the good work that other states have done, particularly California, at least at the time, a real leader, it still is, on storage. Other states have since joined the fold. But California, among others, we consulted as we developed the program design. So I think it's just important to acknowledge that a lot of us are struggling together to figure out how to accelerate emerging clean energy markets. And I think that the dialogue we have with each other, which is often facilitated by CESA, is really crucial. And I also want to thank CESA, and particularly Todd, who spent actually quite a bit of time with us as we developed this program. It was one of the more, I think, rewarding projects that Kavita and I worked on together. and Todd contributed both to the content of the solicitation, but also helped facilitate key connections with relevant national labs and with U.S. OE key staff. So we really appreciate your help, Todd. So with the ACES program, Advancing Commonwealth Energy Storage, a storage demonstration project funding opportunity, we really hope to learn a lot about storage technology, controls, optimization software, market interaction, and a lot more with these ACES projects that we're funding. And we hope that these lessons learned will benefit other states that pursue energy storage market development efforts. So we're just trying to advance the slides here. Here we go. Great. So a little bit on the broader context. You'll see a timeline, kind of a high-level timeline on the left, and all of the state's work on energy storage is branded, if you will, under the Energy Storage Initiative, which is described on the right. So I'll just kind of run through this quickly. Not listed here is over $9 million in energy storage technology development investment that Mass CEC has made over the last 5 to 6 years. So this timeline captures kind of more recent history with regard to market development efforts and targets and ACES. But the state's formal entry into this space dates to May of 2015 with the launch under Governor Charlie Baker of the Energy Storage Initiative. That said, as early as 2014, Mass CEC had begun to scope out a study, the State of Charge, which ultimately became the State of Charge study that Todd referenced earlier, to benchmark the industry and highlight the benefits of storage, identify market barriers, and among other tasks. Our partners at the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources joined us in that effort, and we co-commissioned State of Charge, and we'll describe that in a little bit more detail in a moment. Around that same time, the Mass legislature passed an act to promote energy diversity, and among other things, that piece of legislation tasked DOER with establishing a storage target, which it ultimately did. It also required that the utilities solicit 1,600 megawatts of offshore wind and required the utilities to solicit proposals for approximately 9.5 million megawatt hours of imported hydro. So DOER did ultimately adopt a storage target, 200 megawatt hours, to be met by January 1, 2020, following a robust stakeholder feedback and engagement process. And again, around that time, a bit prior to that, a lot of activity happening simultaneously here. Mass CEC led development of what would become ultimately known as the ACES funding opportunity. Again, details forthcoming. We were joined in that effort in the later stages by DOER in finalizing the design, and DOER ultimately provided the bulk of funding for that effort. So it was a really, in addition to being a unique type of funding opportunity, and certainly one that from a form and structure perspective was new to us, it was also a great partnership between Mass CEC and the state's energy office, DOER. More recently, the legislature passed H 4857, an act to advance clean energy, which called for, among other things, the state's RPS to be increased by 1% until the end of 2019, and increasing at a higher rate in subsequent years. And it also established an energy storage target of 1,000 megawatt hours to be achieved by December 31st, 2025. So that, again, high level of some of the kind of key moments with regard to development of, or the state's efforts to advance the energy storage market here in Massachusetts. So a little bit more, background on State of Charge and ACES. Mass CEC typically commissions a study as we approach an emerging sector or market to ensure that we understand relevant technologies, and the technology's market maturity, make sure we have a handle on market pull, the regulatory landscape, relevant market barriers and energy markets, and to help identify strategies or confirm our instincts about strategies that will help unlock investment and accelerate adoption and expand or improve market conditions. And that's in fact precisely what we sought to do with State of Charge. And before we commissioned the study, we had already begun to frame out a funding opportunity designed to highlight the multiple benefits we knew storage could provide. And again, I think it's worth noting that this funding opportunity originally conceived within the existing framework of the Mass Clean Energy Center's Innovate Mass program was unlike anything we had developed prior. So we certainly have other technology development and commercialization acceleration funding opportunities, and those have focused on developing or demonstrating particular clean energy technologies. But with ACES, as it came to be known, we really wanted to focus, and did for the first time, on incentivizing development of new and innovative business models that would provide support at a level that would attract energy storage project developers, overcome project launch inertia, market uncertainty, and ultimately attract investment here, storage project investment to the Commonwealth. So we were very happy, Kavita and I were very happy when we had made substantial progress in thinking about the design of that type of a funding opportunity. We were very happy when the State of Charge consulting team recommended that energy storage demonstration projects that pilot innovative, broadly replicable use cases or business models were among the dozen or so recommendations that they made in the context of the State of Charge study. And the $1 million we had originally conceived, which we thought was a rather large figure for one program, as we became more confident and more ambitious, we bumped that to $10 million. And ultimately, thanks in large measure to the leadership of DOER Commissioner Judith Judson and support from Governor Baker, that investment was bumped from $10 million to $20 million. So we were then working with a dollar figure that we knew, or were very confident, would attract substantial market interest. So we simply wanted to quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but just wanted to put some of this work, the ACES work and State of Charge in context, and also signal that Mass CEC and DOER are certainly supporting other efforts that impact the storage industry. Again, including over $9 million that Mass CEC, $9 million in investment Mass CEC has already made in storage technology development, but DOER has issued funding opportunities for resilient energy systems at critical facilities, and that process is ongoing, and awards continue to be made under that program, the CCERI. Of course, the state's new solar incentive program is coming online in the near future, which we believe will be the first solar incentive program that includes an adder for storage. Mass CEC has a microgrid, a community microgrid funding opportunity that was animated by and drew a lot of kind of inspiration from the NYSERDA's New York Prize microgrid funding opportunity. So we thank New York for their leadership in that area. And as well as other efforts focused on, Kavita's done some great work looking at codes and standards and energy storage safety and so much more. So we're really doing our best to try and knock down as many barriers we can and increase the chances that storage project investment will flow to the state. And then finally, before I hand it off to Kavita, we just wanted to put again our work in context. There certainly may be other states. We don't claim this to be a kind of a comprehensive list here, but other states are certainly moving aggressively here, adding storage targets or mandates. We simply wanted to put the Massachusetts target in context and also give you a sense of how it has evolved over time. again, we're happy that other states are those that came before us and those that came after us and will continue to do so. It will simply build more momentum for this really important industry and this important technology that will help us address a range of really critical energy challenges here in Massachusetts and indeed across the country. So with that, that's the high-level overview, and now I'm going to turn it over to Kavita, who will get more into the details of the ACES funding opportunity.
Thank you, Galen, and thank you to Todd and the entire CESA team, where it's a real honor to get this Slides Award. I certainly had not imagined it when we were working on it, but we're very proud and excited to talk about this program. So this slide that we have here explains the objectives of the request for proposals that we published in March of 2017. And it distills it into these boxes that I mentioned here with the details. So the grant was structured, originally we had $10 million, as Galen just explained. We thought we might make somewhere between 10 and 15 awards. We were purely guessing at that point. And we thought that we would make awards between $100,000 and $1.25 million. Those were just some pragmatic bounds to, be efficient in terms of our resources, but also put a cap so that we could make multiple awards. We had required at least a 50% cost share on the project. That is, we required a one-to-one match at least. And that was in part informed by the state of charge study, which said that that in most use cases there's a certain gap in the cost effectiveness, and so we felt that 50% was actually a fair number. We hope to attract a diversity of technologies. We of course acknowledge that lithium ion was very predominant in the market and continues to be, but again, we didn't want to pick any single technology, so we hope to attract a diversity of technologies, and we had some bounds on the round-trip efficiency. As the state of charge had laid out, we hoped again to attract a wide variety of use cases, some of which were outlined there. The RFP did not limit it to those use cases, and we certainly found both variations of the use cases mentioned in the state of charge study and new use cases. The funding opportunity was open to projects in both the investor-owned utility territories and the municipal light plants. But given the kind of funding, we said that at least 50% of the funds would go to projects in or partnered with investor-owned utility territory. And then we wanted these projects to be at all scales. So in particular, we invited projects at the distribution scale because the state of charge study said that a lot of the benefits of storage was local, and a lot of benefits would be realized if it were distributed geographically because of the kinds of benefits that it brings to the distribution grid. Again, because we were trying to catalyze the market, we were signaling that we would like a wide range of host sites so that each of those could then in turn serve as exemplars for further storage deployment in those segments. And then through our research and education, we had at that time understood that the big barrier in storage deployment was the business model piece, in particular understanding how these projects could be cost effective by stacking multiple value streams, which was not trivial because of the different market rules and the optimization of the battery that were involved. We were also looking for projects with multiple drivers and benefits, the customer level benefits, of course, but then also system level benefits and non-monetizable benefits, to name some. We encouraged pairing of projects with complementary technologies, such in particular renewable energy technologies, but also demand management and other energy efficiency kinds of technologies. And we certainly got a wide variety of those. We wanted geographical diversity in the state just to showcase the benefits of energy storage all across the state. And we also encourage solving local energy challenges. So for instance, if there were, you know, in one of the islands, when capacity or when the load was getting to capacity, to help solve that challenge with a non-wires alternative. So these were some of the points that we distilled the RFP objectives to, and we used to drive our selection process. So the next few slides will talk about how the awards fulfill these objectives, and some of those I'll go through very quickly because they're simply charts. So the first one here just shows the distribution of the awards across the Commonwealth. In part, it was reflective of where we got the applications from as well. We got 69 applications, of which only 3 were determined ineligible. But of those 66, we proposed to award 26 projects, and those were approved. They covered 9 use cases, and the majority of them from the State of Charge report. And that was not surprising, but and it was also validating those use cases in the State of Charge report. We were very excited these projects in terms of the energy storage capacity and energy deployment here. We started with maybe 4 megawatts, 7 megawatt hours, and this was going to result in 32 megawatts and 83 megawatt hours as if they were successful. Excuse me. And then we proposed, and these would sum up to $20 million in awards, or almost $20 million in awards, but they leveraged $31 million, so exceeded the one-to-one match, which I would say was very gratifying because I think it really showed us that the industry was at the right point for this RFP, and we felt that it was a successful RFP, and also we were able to make this very diverse constellation of awards that we felt would catalyze the market in Massachusetts. This slide shows the set of awards, the 26 awards that we made. As you can tell from the logos, there's a variety of applicants. There are project developers, utilities, MLPs, customers like the universities and schools. And then here we show the host types that were in this award. And so we have a wide variety of host sites, commercial, education that included universities and a school. We also had a couple of hospitals that use these for critical and emergency support. There were some aggregated residential projects, a manufacturing project, and a project on a farm, a transit project, hotel, the Encore one in Everett, and a defense site, and in Massachusetts, one should expect a biotech site. So that was good as well. And then this slide just shows the coverage across the different use cases. We had investor-owned utility projects, MLP projects, merchant projects, behind-the-meter projects, a resiliency project, a few resiliency projects, and then we had a couple. One was transit, and another one paired with transportation, EV charging in particular. This slide shows the distribution across the different utilities. The IOUs, of course, have the big wedges, and then the MLPs have a distribution of them. Here is a distribution of the complementary technologies. So not surprisingly, because solar has been such a focus in Massachusetts, there were a lot of projects paired with solar. But then we also have, wind and a couple of gas plants and EV charging. So that was also very cool to see the storage systems helping these complementary technologies and being helped by the complementary technologies, perhaps in terms of charging and so on. And then, as Todd mentioned earlier, one of the thrusts of our RFP was to see and to demonstrate non-monetizable benefits. And here are just a few of the non-monetizable benefits that we saw the projects showcasing. Backup power or emergency power for critical loads, as I mentioned, for hospitals. There were a couple of grid resiliency and congestion relief kind of projects. So, for instance, winter peak congestion in terms of natural gas. And then transmission and distribution cost reduction. This was a lot of the IOUs and MLPs went for that. There were many that helped with this renewable integration, for instance, lifting moratoriums on renewable installations, or with solar smoothing and those kinds of things. And of course, with most or all projects, there was the benefit of greenhouse gas emission reduction. Now, of course, those were projected, and we hope to evaluate the reduction piece as the projects are implemented and operational. So in the next few slides, I'd like to talk about why we think that this RFP is special and innovative. At the time we started this, Massachusetts was one of a handful of states to integrate energy storage into a long-term energy planning strategy. And I'm now very happy to see that more states have joined in. That's great because costs will come down and more people can benefit from this. And we see many effects of climate change in the news. And so I think some of that can be related with energy storage. In particular, this RFP brought to the spotlight value stacking and business model demonstration. And then, as I just mentioned, it called for non-monetizable and system benefits to be core to the part of the project, and all the awards have that. And then ultimately, it was trying to fuel growth of the energy storage industry in the Commonwealth. In terms of cost effectiveness, I mentioned the leverage numbers earlier. We saw 14 different business models, and hopefully I can talk about that in the examples. And because we had the one-to-one cost share, we got a pretty good value for the grant dollars, I would say. In terms of replicability, we have seen our RFP being used at least in one other state. So that in terms of the RFP itself, I feel it's replicable. And then we were looking to showcase a broadly replicable set of awards, which we felt in turn lead to increased commercialization and deployment. So that was a key emphasis, that these projects need to be replicable and they can't be sort of very one-off and niche. And then, as I mentioned, ACES itself is, the RFP is free for anyone to adapt and use. And we've seen at least one such case of it. In terms of public benefits, we think one of the major benefits is educating customers, utilities, consumers, policymakers, and a variety of industry stakeholders. And I can say from firsthand experience in the contracting process, there's any number of non-monetizable benefits in terms of educating lawyers and really the next round of industry stakeholders that may not be very conversant with energy storage, but in terms of these awards, they are getting educated. And as Galen mentioned earlier, these de-risk investments, once you can see a project, let's say in Walmart, we hope Target or any other big box retailer will be encouraged to consider it to their benefit as well. Hospitals and universities similarly. And then we hope to showcase the non-monetizable benefits that I talked about. And then really importantly for us and for DOER, we hope that the program results, which means the data that we will get and the experience that we will get in the construction and commissioning of these projects, we hope will inform policy recommendations and program recommendations going in the future. So I'd just like to take a couple of minutes now to talk about a couple of awards that we made. We have many examples, but I'll just stick to a couple. So one of the projects that it's actually under contract now is the Boston Medical Center. It's cool because I just visited the site recently. They're going to put a 0.5 megawatt lithium-ion battery on the roof between their air handler system and their CHP system. So that's very interesting. They are going to use this battery for demand charge reduction, capacity tag reduction, frequency regulation by registering it in the ISO New England market. But more importantly, this battery will help with critical equipment support and resiliency in case of a power outage. So they propose to island this battery in case of an outage. And you may know that Boston Medical Center supports low-income communities, and this is a big priority for the administration and us in particular as an organization as well, to make clean and renewable energy equitable and accessible. And then, less sort of quantifiable benefits are the potential for upgrade deferral and greenhouse gas emissions, to just name a few. So this is a behind the meter project. And this picture near the top, this infographic that we have, is a way that we have tried to depict the business models of this project. We think of the owner, financier, and the beneficiary on one axis, and then we have these other entities like the utility, the project developer, and the host site. And here we show how the owner, financier, and the beneficiary is the hospital. So it's the host site, which has the house icon, and the utility and the project developer, technology provider here, Tesla, are neither of those and are just vendors. And you will see some variations of this as we go along. In this slide here, I just want to flash this slide. This is the manufacturing project that I had referred to earlier. It's in the Acushnet ball plant in the south of Massachusetts. And this is a very interesting project that has multiple entities, and they hope to use this both for their bill savings, but also enroll this asset in the wholesale markets and get wholesale markets revenues from it. I'd like to talk about an aggregated residential project. So this was cool. This was proposed originally by Solar City, now acquired by Tesla, and was in partnership with National Grid. They proposed to put their 5 kilowatt, 13.2 kilowatt hour system in 500 homes in Nantucket, and then the aggregation of these storage systems would help the distribution system in Nantucket, which is presumably why National Grid wanted to partner with it. So for the customer, this was going to provide backup power benefits. They would take advantage of the ITC. This would also allow increased renewable integration on that island. And in terms of congestion release, possibly help with Nantucket's power supply. So Nantucket, for anyone that is not intimately familiar with Massachusetts, is an island off the coast of Massachusetts. And then, if I may, I'll just take one more example. And this is an MLP project where the lithium-ion battery is co-located with a gas turbine. And this was one of the use cases that we showcased in the State of Charge report, that that the energy storage system could be co-located with traditional generators and help with the heat rate of those generators, help them operate at an optimal heat rate, which would result in cost reductions for them, which would then be passed on to ratepayers, and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions because they are operating at their optimal efficiency. And then here, this is helping with a winter congestion in terms of natural gas, where its use is both heat and electricity. So in the interest of time, I will stop here and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Kavita and Galen. That was terrific. And we do have some questions. I'd like to ask one first. You talked about non-monetizable benefits, and I know that was a central element of the ACES program, was to support projects that would demonstrate benefits of storage that can't right now be monetized. And this goes back to one of the fundamental conclusions of the State of Charge report, which is that there's a disconnect between services that can be provided by energy storage and markets that exist to allow the owners of that storage to actually be able to monetize those benefits. So just to follow up, once you've demonstrated through this program some of these non-monetizable benefits, then what? In other words, is there a follow-up effort to take action of some kind, whether it's in the regulatory or policy realms, to take these demonstrations and somehow start to realign markets to make those benefits monetizable once they've been demonstrated?
So thank you for that question, Todd. So that's an interesting question, and it's not a simple one. I'll say that there are a variety of non-monetizable benefits, that some that seem to be addressable in the nearer term, and then some that may need addressing in the long term. So one non-monetizable benefit in one of these projects was, as I mentioned earlier, to lift the moratorium on solar or reduce voltage flicker on in the distribution feeder, right? So no one's paying money to address this issue, right? or perhaps this is the solution for that issue. And so that non-monetizable benefit may actually be very immediately apparent, right? As soon as you can lift the moratorium on solar, that monetizable benefit has been realized. Or when the voltage flicker stops, then that's done. There are certain other non-monetizable benefits that we had called out in the State of Charge report, perhaps some wholesale market ones, where, let's say, the storage asset could be used for a variety of services, but the rules were not quite right. So at that time, those were considered non-monetizable. I'm optimistic that some of those will be addressed by the FERC 841 order. So, for instance, even the, stipulation that you must now consider energy storage assets as small as 100 kilowatts, that's already like a step in that direction. And then there might be others, as you say, may need some other kind of action, policy, or regulatory, but I think for the moment it remains to be seen, right? So we need to see it. And then depending on how people feel about our carbon price, either optimistic or pessimistic about that, that's a non-monetizable benefit that we absolutely want to evaluate, right? We do want to evaluate whether the claim that energy storage can significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions is true or not. And if it is not true, then try to understand what those circumstances are, right? We've seen some reports from other parts of the country that claim that or show that, but those are sort of very specific circumstances. So I think it depends on the kinds of non-monetizable benefits. But we're certainly, look to address any irregularities or any sort of eccentricities that may exist and try to see if we can address them.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, that was the difficult question. We'll go on to some questions from the folks who are taking part in the webinar. And I think, let's see, one person asks, can you talk more about how projects are getting financed and what type of financing models are being used beyond the grants?
Yeah, so that's a very good question as well. So this is where I'll recall we said, we looked at sort of 14 different business models, and financing was one aspect of that in defining what a business model is. We are seeing, so the grants are only offsetting, I'll recall again that we needed a one-to-one match on the grants for the project. So the grants contribute to only 50% or less of the project budget. Grants are being either self-financed, that's a lot of cases. I don't have the numbers immediately off the top of my head. But then there are also other financing schemes like, let's say the project developer will own and operate the asset and shared savings. So there's the shared savings model. There's also the lease model where the project developer is given a fixed payment over a period, over the entire lifetime of, 10 or 20, the term of the battery. And then the owner and operator nets the savings, right? So it's incentivized to optimize the benefits from the battery, whether it be savings or revenue streams, and the party leasing the system pockets the savings. So there are a variety of such models, and then there's also merchant financing. I know that Galen wants to say something.
Which is the utility rate base.
Oh, right, and then there's the utility rate-based model as well.
Sorry, was that, was that the conclusion of your remark?
Yes, I'm sorry. I should
Okay.
have said after. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, that's fine. So somebody wants to know whether the ACES program is monitoring or tracking emissions impacts from storage. And I know you had said something about emissions as one of the potential benefits that you were looking to demonstrate, but how is the program tracking those, or is it?
Yeah, what we are requiring is a variety of things, and we're building some redundancy into the tracking, and so what we're expecting each project to do is report to the best methodology that they can the greenhouse gas emission reduction. What we acknowledge is that there is no one single well understood, well accepted methodology. There are variety of methodologies out there to compute greenhouse gas emission reductions to varying levels of accuracy and taking into account a variety of assumptions. So I'll say that, we're still trying to figure it out. But in the meanwhile, we're requesting each project, or we're requiring each project to provide what they think is their emission reductions. And then in addition to that, we're requiring all projects to provide us very granular data. So we're requiring all projects to provide us 1 minute interval data, and that will go to a program consultant that we have hired that will help us manage these projects, and they will receive this data. And then what we hope to do with that data is then, put that data against other data like, the market data and the fuel and use data and all of that, to try to see if we can get some aggregated analysis of the greenhouse gas emissions impact, and hopefully that will be reduction. We've also been in discussions with the national labs to see if they have tools and methodologies that they can apply towards this. But we're still kind of forming this up because we're just in the contracting phase with all the applicants. And just to correct it, so by default, we're requiring 1 minute interval data, but for any project that does frequency regulation, we're requiring 4-second interval data from the project.
Thank you. The person who asked that question has followed up with a comment. They say California recently established a calculation methodology, and you should take a look at the SGIP program for their carbon calculations. So that would be the California Self-Generation Incentive Program.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have looked at the SGIP program for other aspects of our contracts as well, the data acquisition system specification and so on. So we continue to look towards them to, take any lessons learned. Appreciate that.
Great. So somebody else wants to know, and this is a long question, in looking at RFP storage awardees, there appear to be 2 awardees for residential sites. Could you speak to the benefits and costs for those projects, which benefits are currently monetizable, and whether the benefit cost ratio can be greater than 1 for these currently, or whether more time is needed to realize more monetizable benefits for residential projects that are not necessarily being dispatched by utilities?
Well, I'll certainly invite Kavita to join me on this one, but I think what we're hoping to achieve with this overall program and with these particular projects is actually to learn what that cost-benefit ratio looks like for these projects. And based on more recent dialogue we've had with some of our utility partners with service territory here in the state of Massachusetts, I won't name names, but it's a relatively small number, so you can take your guesses. We're hearing greater and greater enthusiasm about the cost effectiveness of storage deployment at the residential level. So, I think that this is what we hope to learn from these projects, is what types of benefits can they provide, direct benefits to the customer as well as benefits to the utility that are both easy to kind of measure and monetize immediately, and those that are perhaps a little bit more difficult to immediately monetize or measure. So maybe I'll stop there. I don't know whether or not we have the breakdown at our fingertips with regard to those project-specific details.
Yeah, so on these projects, the confidential pro forma that was submitted did capture the benefits. Certainly, the benefits are not just to the customer, and that as the state of charge indicated, at that time, the benefits to a single customer were not determined to be cost effective. So our RFP consequently disallowed that particular use case. But we were inviting the aggregated residential projects because then there is a certain amount of benefit to the utilities as well. And some of that can be monetized if it aggregates to a large enough capacity, then you can reduce, the utility can realize reduction in capacity and transmission charges. So that piece is monetizable. And then there are other sort of less easy to quantify benefits like the feeder benefits that I was describing earlier.
Thank you. I could also add a couple of things because I've been sort of following this. One is for the questioner or anyone who's interested in the benefit cost ratio for behind the meter storage and residential applications. You might want to take a look at the current energy efficiency plan in development in Massachusetts. There is included in the draft plan at least one proposal from a utility and I believe there are two now, from utilities for residential behind the meter energy storage. And in order to be considered for the energy efficiency program, those measures all have to pass a benefit cost test. And so the residential storage proposed for the energy efficiency plan does pass. In fact, Clean Energy Group recently hired an economist to run an analysis on commercial and low-income applications for behind-the-meter storage, and found that they also pass the cost-benefit analysis required by Massachusetts for the energy efficiency program. And that's that report, that white paper, is on our website if you'd like to take a look at it. The other thing I want to mention was that there are a number of utilities, including Green Mountain Power here in Vermont. There's Liberty Utilities in New Hampshire. There's National Grid in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and others that have either proposed or are developing or have developed residential energy storage programs. So there's beginning to be a body of information out there to look at for the information you're looking for. Okay, somebody wants to know if you could elaborate on the utility role in these grantee projects beyond the normal interconnection. So that would include things like dynamic price signals, distributed system optimization and control with other distributed energy resources, et cetera.
So Todd, I don't know that I understood the last piece, but I'll just speak to utility role as I interpreted. We did, encourage the projects to get letters of support, including from the utilities. And a variety of these projects had gotten letters of support from the utilities. So for instance, this aggregated Solar City residential project that I was talking about did have a letter from National Grid saying that they were you know, the letter is always soft, but they did have a letter saying that they were somewhat supportive, as much as their legalese will allow them. So there were a variety of projects that did provide utility support, and the utilities, when they did support these projects, I think called out the distribution level benefits to these projects. So it wasn't just interconnection. Now, interconnection is indeed a very critical part of these projects, and we did require these projects to submit the pre-application of the interconnections to understand, you know, how their interconnection queue looked like and what the risks were and so on. But yeah, you know, a variety of projects did have utility support, which signals that utilities are very interested in these projects, and that's also evidenced in the rate cases that we have in Massachusetts. And just to call out, both the investor-owned utilities and some of the MLPs did provide this kind of support, letters of support. And by letters of support, it meant that they're interested in this project. So we took that to mean that they would be actively involved in looking at the benefits and, you know, what benefits they could get out of it. And I, in the contracting process, recently heard that one of the projects that didn't have sort of explicit support at the time of application or even award had sort of now come to the point where they were keenly interested in this project.
And I would just add to that in addition to, I don't really think that we covered too much the number or quality of applicants that applications that we received for the program. But I would say that both the number and the quality and robustness of the applications from the utilities, both the investor-owned utilities and particularly the MLP applications were quite high. And we were impressed, I think, by the response from the utility community. I think that we were anticipating, I think, a fairly strong response overall to the funding opportunity, but that response exceeded our expectations, and I think that was particularly with regard to the utility response.
Great, thanks. I think that the second part of that question, I don't know if you, Kavita, you said you weren't sure what it was. It was beyond interconnection. Are there other things the utilities are doing to support these projects or be involved in these projects, such as optimizing and controlling the batteries, or engaging with dynamic pricing or something of that nature? Is there anything that you wanted to call out that they are doing?
So again, I'll call out for the aggregated residential one. The application said that the exact mode of the interaction between the utility and the customer side of this was left to be determined, but they said that they would come up with some sort of agreement where the utility might use some part of it. So I can't answer in specifics because we don't know yet, but I was just trying to say that there was some intent to do something around it. It's exactly what remains to be seen.
Okay, thanks. We have some more questions, and we're going to get to as many as we can in the next 10 minutes or so. I just want to mention there are a few people who are asking whether the webinar will be available or whether the slides will be available. They will be. We record these webinars and post them to our to the CESA website. And so you will be able to review the webinar if you missed something that you'd like to go back and hear again. That will be posted shortly after we finished with the live webinar. So next question, were the environmental impacts of batteries considered? And this question has to do with questions about batteries increasing or decreasing emissions depending on whether they're charging during the sort of dirtier generation periods or cleaner generation periods. And so I guess the question is that something that is being looked at through any of these projects in terms of not, and we talked about emissions, but in terms of operational considerations to optimize the environmental benefits?
So I think in terms of greenhouse gas emission impacts, I had alluded to earlier, we're getting all this granular data and we hope to analyze it. And we're in particular, concerned about this. Is it going to be, consuming or causing a greenhouse gas emission increase? Or is it indeed a reduction, as we all hope it will be? So we are going to try to do this analysis, and we're trying to set that up, and that's what I was referring to earlier, and then also the engagement with the national labs. In terms of how to operate the battery, taking those into consideration, in my personal opinion, that again, there's not enough sort of data, and it's not a simple calculation because it's a system calculation. So you'd have to run some sort of dispatch model if you wanted to be somewhat accurate about it, and then analyze against that. So for the moment, I feel like, or for the moment, what the team had decided was that the batteries would operate to their most economic benefit, and then we would do this analysis. And then, given that this is 32 megawatts only, and the first set of demonstration projects, hopefully we would learn something from it. And if there were something glaringly wrong, then that could inform future actions. But some of that remains to be seen. And I don't believe it's very clear at this point what should be done.
I would just add to that, Todd, and those listening in, that the state is also exploring a clean peak standard. So I didn't mention that in the kind of legislative or contextual overview, but the House Bill 4857 also instructed DOER to develop a clean peak standard. I know that Arizona explored this a bit, and so DOER has been charged with both defining what those seasonal peaks would be and then developing an incentive structure to incentivize deployment of peak assets that could be storage that had been charged entirely or predominantly with renewables, or demand reduction assets, other clean peaking assets, kind of getting at the concerns that you've laid out, Todd. So that process has just begun. DOER is taking the lead on that. That perhaps could be the subject of a future CESA webinar. It's early days, but we anticipate that will impact storage project design and deployment in Massachusetts at some point in the future.
Great, thank you. I'm sure it will be the subject of at least one future webinar. So yeah, this is a new thing, a new concept, really, I think, that you referred to, the Clean Peak Standard, and it's certainly it's anticipated to have a significant impact on the storage market. So we'll be interested to see how that works out. Somebody wants to know what advice you would give to other states looking into incentivizing targeted energy storage efforts.
So one thing I have said in answer to this question, just informally, not in front of such a large audience, is that storage does have localized benefits. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. So if I were to do it in a different state, I would start by doing some sort of analysis like the state of charge study did, And you could do it to any degree of rigorousness that you could afford, and really take into account the the energy challenges in that state, or the trends or the transitions, and then looking at the goals as well. If you have greenhouse gas emission reduction goals or renewable targets, whatever those cases may be, and then do some sort of analysis to see how storage could fit in that, and try to do this exercise about how much, where in the grid, is it all dispersed, is it all in one location, etc. And then try to design programs or regulations that then support that. I really don't think it is, we could have done what California did. We could if we had enormous resources, but some of it you have to both do some research in advance of, and then try in small amounts to see what works. And I think business model demonstration is an easy one, because then the market tells you what they think they can make economically viable. So personally, I'm a fan of the business model demonstration fees, because not only does the market tell you what it can afford to do, then it also tells the rest of the market what could be a good idea.
Great, thank you. Somebody has asked whether there are additional ACES RFPs in the works. Is this a one-off, or do you anticipate any further additional solicitations under the program?
For now, this is the one and only ACES. We don't anticipate releasing another funding opportunity like it. We have worked closely in partnership with our colleagues in our renewable energy generation division, with a relatively modest effort to help manufacturers explore solar plus storage. I think I mentioned earlier that we're also doing work to help alleviate and address concerns around storage safety, particularly firefighting, trying to educate code officials in jurisdictions around the state, and we continue to support storage technology development through a suite of programs focused in that realm. But we don't plan any other big efforts at this time. I think that we've got these 26 projects. We want to monitor them closely. We want to make sure that they get underway and that we begin to see project data, and that these the variety of these projects will help inform future work that we might do, but also state storage policy. So we're certainly not ruling out other large-scale investments in the industry, but for now, we've got enough on our plate.
Sounds like it, and it's a program, as you noted, that started out much more at a much more modest level and expanded significantly. It seems like there's a lot yet to do with the current crop of ACES awardees before anybody needs to start thinking about another one. But it is a quite impressive program. Congratulations on winning the Slice Award. One last question, and I think we're going to end. Somebody wants to know if you could expand on the difference between megawatts and megawatt hours, and I'm going to expand on that question. In putting together the ACES program, how did you decide how to, I guess, measure storage, and what was the most useful way to measure it within the program?
So that's a good question. So as we showed in that slide that tried to distill the objectives of the program, The megawatts and megawatt hours were only one, or depending on how you count it, one or two components of what we were trying to achieve. So unlike a much more established technology, we didn't think it was appropriate to sort of measure this by who's going to bring in the biggest battery or other energy storage system here, and how can we maximize the deployment. We really try to preserve the objective that regardless that we were trying to pilot these innovative and broadly replicable use models to serve as a catalyst to the market, because we were clear that $10 million doesn't go very far if you were to buy any kind of storage, and nor does 20 million. So in some sense, we were not trying to just size up the capacity. But having said that, we did want diversity of projects with different sizes to, again, both learn from it and also to demonstrate the benefits of it. So we do have a 5 megawatt battery in there, and then we have these smaller systems at the aggregated residential project. I don't know if this was the purpose of the question, but I interpreted the question to mean how did we come up with these numbers, or did we maximize the power and energy? And that was not the objective. That was not the cost function that we were optimizing for. It was only one of many factors.
Right, and the basic question was, what's the difference between megawatts and megawatt hours?
Oh, so yeah, so I can answer that. So megawatts is the capacity, so which we typically use to mean what is the maximum power that this system can give. And then megawatt hours is how much energy can it give. So if you filled up the system and charged it up to the maximum, and discharge at some rate, what is the maximum you could get, right? So if you were to have a 5 megawatt, 10 megawatt hour battery, then if you were to discharge all of it at the maximum rate, then you would discharge it in 2 hours because you had 10 megawatt hours. But if you were to discharge it or use the energy at a lower rate, then it could last you more time.
Okay, thanks very much. And that is all we have time for. I apologize to those who didn't get their questions addressed, but we did the best we could in the time we have. And I believe we have Samantha back online to maybe tell us about future webinars that you might want to consider coming back for.
Sure, thanks, Todd. And thank you to everyone who attended today and to our speakers. So some of the webinars that we have coming up, we've got one on August 23rd on solar PV recycling, issues and considerations for state decision makers. And then the following week on August 30th, we've got a webinar on community solar program design and implementation for low and moderate income customers. Next after that is a webinar on offshore wind transmission, lessons from Germany and regulatory considerations for offshore wind transmission in the US. And then finally, the last one we've got scheduled is September 11th, and it's going to be on California's pioneering policies for new homes, greater efficiency with required solar energy. So a lot of really interesting topics. You can learn about those and sign up at CESA.org/webinars. So we hope to see you there. Thank you for tuning in today, everybody.